I was 72 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a shattered hip, when my 3 sons stood around me and made a promise. They'd split my care costs 3 ways. They'd be there for me. After 50 years of sacrifice, it was finally their turn to help. 9 months later, I'd paid $71,000 from my own savings, while they posted vacation photos and attended charity galas. My phone never rang. My messages went unanswered. So I did something they never saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, and let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. Now, back to my story. The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Hospital flickered above me like dying stars, casting sterile shadows across the pale green walls. I lay in bed 6, curtain half drawn, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the shuffle of nurses' shoes on linoleum. My left hip throbbed where the surgeon had replaced the shattered joint 3 days earlier. A fall in my own garden, of all places, reaching for tomatoes I'd planted in May. The irony wasn't lost on me. 72 years of caring for others, and I couldn't even harvest my own vegetables without breaking. "Mom, we need to talk." My eldest son, Richard, stood at the foot of my bed, his expensive wool coat still buttoned, briefcase in hand. He hadn't even sat down. Behind him, my middle son, Marcus, leaned against the window frame, scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone already mentally elsewhere. And Daniel, my youngest at 41, perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, leg bouncing with that nervous energy that had defined him since childhood. 3 sons, 3 men I had raised alone after their father walked out when Daniel was still in diapers. 3 adults who now stood in this hospital room, looking at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. "The doctor says you'll need at least 3 months of intensive rehabilitation," Richard continued, his tone the same one he used in boardroom presentations, clinical, detached. "Then home care for another 6 to 9 months minimum. The facility they're recommending runs about $8,000 a month. Your Medicare will cover some, but not all of it," I finished quietly, my throat dry from the anesthesia that still lingered in my system. Richard nodded. "Right. We've discussed it, and we want you to know we're here for you." He glanced at his brothers, who both nodded in synchronized agreement that felt rehearsed. "We'll split the costs 3 ways. Whatever you need, Mom. You took care of us our whole lives. Now it's our turn." Marcus finally looked up from his phone, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Absolutely. Family takes care of family, right?" "We've got you, Mom," Daniel added, standing to squeeze my hand. "Don't worry about a thing. Just focus on getting better." The words should have comforted me, should have filled the hollow space in my chest that had opened the moment I'd hit the ground 3 days ago, the moment I'd realized how truly alone I was in that garden, how long it had taken for a neighbor to hear my cries. But something in their eyes, a flicker of something I recognized from decades of motherhood, from countless moments of catching them in lies about broken windows and borrowed money, made me pause. "Thank you," I whispered anyway. Because what else could a mother say? "That means everything." They stayed another 15 minutes. Richard took a phone call in the hallway. Marcus checked his watch 4 times. Daniel talked about his new startup, the one that was definitely going to take off this time, the same phrase I'd heard about 7 different ventures over the past decade. Then they were gone, promising to visit soon, to handle everything, to be there. The room felt colder after they left. I was transferred to Sunrise Rehabilitation Center on a gray October morning that matched my mood. The facility was pleasant enough, cream-colored walls, floral paintings that looked like they'd been purchased in bulk, the perpetual smell of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. My room overlooked a small courtyard where a fountain trickled endlessly, its sound meant to be soothing but somehow only emphasizing the silence of my phone, which remained stubbornly quiet. The first week, I told myself they were busy. Richard had just made partner at his law firm. Marcus was managing 3 restaurants across the city. Daniel was always juggling something, even if that something rarely panned out. The second week, I started making excuses for them. Traffic in the city was terrible. They'd called while I was in therapy. They'd sent flowers, except no flowers arrived. By the third week, I stopped making excuses. I lay in my mechanical bed at night, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the days since the hospital. 21. 21 days since my sons had promised to split my care costs, to be there for me, to finally repay decades of sacrifice with simple presence. The bill for the first month came in week 4, $7,147 at $32. I stared at the invoice slip that the billing administrator, a kind woman named Patricia with reading glasses on a beaded chain, had brought to my room. She'd explained gently that they needed payment by the end of the month, that she was sure my family would handle it, but they did have policies. I called Richard first. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. You've reached Richard Morrison, lead counsel at Morrison, Sykes & Palmer. Please leave a detailed message and I'll return your call within 24 business hours. Richard, it's Mom. I need to talk to you about the rehabilitation bill. Could you call me back when you have a chance? I love you. 24 business hours came and went. I tried Marcus next. Hey, this is Marcus. Can't get to the phone right now. Text me and I'll hit you back. Marcus, honey, it's your mother. I need to discuss the payment we talked about at the hospital. Please call me when you can. I miss you. No response. Daniel's phone went straight to voicemail. The automated voice informed me his mailbox was full. I sat in the therapy room the next morning, gripping parallel bars as I relearned how to walk, my new hip sending sharp protests up my spine with each tentative step. Around me, other patients shuffled and struggled, most of them accompanied by children or spouses who cheered each small victory. I had Teresa, my physical therapist, a patient woman in her 30s who reminded me gently to breathe, to take my time, to not push too hard. You're doing great, Eleanor, she encouraged as I made it to the end of the bars, better than yesterday. Thank you, I managed, focusing on the mechanics of turning around, of not falling, of staying upright in a body that suddenly felt foreign and fragile. Your family visiting this weekend? Teresa asked as she helped me back to the wheelchair. The question was innocent. She didn't know that weekends had come and gone, that my phone remained silent, that the promises made in that hospital room had evaporated like morning mist. They're very busy, I said, the lie tasting like ash. Important careers, you know. Teresa smiled sympathetically and didn't push. That night, I used my own savings to pay the first month's bill. The money I'd been keeping for emergencies, for repairs to my house, for the small comforts I'd promised myself in retirement after a lifetime of penny pinching and sacrifice. The account balance dropped from $24,000 to $69,952.68. I told myself it would be fine. My sons would pay me back. They'd just forgotten. They were busy. They would call. They didn't call. The memories came at night, unbidden and relentless, while the hallway lights dimmed and the facility settled into its nocturnal rhythms of beeping machines and shuffling night nurses. I remembered Richard at 7, coming home with a black eye from defending a smaller boy at school. How I'd held ice to his face and told him I was proud of him for standing up for someone weaker. How he'd hugged me and said, "I'll always protect people, Mom. Just like you protect us." Where was that boy now? I remembered Marcus at 12, crying in my arms when his father missed another birthday, another promise broken. "You're enough, Mom," I'd told him, stroking his hair. "We're enough together." He'd looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and said, "When I grow up, I'm never going to let you down. Never." The words echoed in the empty room. I remembered Daniel, always my baby, struggling through college, through jobs that never quite worked out, through relationships that crumbled. How many times had I covered his rent, paid his car insurance, slipped him money for groceries while he got on his feet? 20 times? 30? I'd lost count years ago. "You're the best mom in the world," he'd say each time, hugging me tight. "I don't know what I'd do without you. One day, I'm going to make you so proud. I'm going to take care of you the way you've taken care of me." One day. I had believed him, believed all of them. the memories scrolled back further, to the beginning, when I was just 22 and pregnant with Richard, and Robert, their father, had seemed like the answer to everything. We'd married young, him in his Air Force uniform, me in my mother's altered wedding dress, both of us stupid with hope and certainty. The first time he hit me, Richard was 6 months old, a slap across the face for burning dinner. I'd stood in that tiny kitchen with my face burning and my son crying in the next room, and I'd told myself it was stress. It was the adjustment to civilian life. It was anything but what it was. By the time Marcus came along, the violence had become routine, predictable. I learned to read the signs, to make myself small, to protect my boys from seeing too much, even as I couldn't protect myself. Daniel's birth was the breaking point, for Robert, not for me. He looked at his third son, at the responsibility of another mouth to feed, another future to fund, and he simply left. Walked out on a Tuesday morning while I was nursing Daniel, took the car and half our savings, and disappeared into a life I would only hear about in fragments years later. Second wife, new family, fresh start. He'd left me with 3 sons under 8, a part-time job at a grocery store, and a courage I didn't know I possessed. I worked 2 jobs, then 3. Cashier during the day, cleaning offices at night. Weekend shifts at a diner that smelled perpetually of grease and coffee. I learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep. Learned to make $1 stretch across a week. Learned to smile at my boys while my back screamed and my hands cracked from industrial cleaners and my heart splintered from exhaustion. But I kept them fed, kept them clothed, kept them in school. Richard needed braces. I took a 4th job, doing alterations for a dry cleaner, hunched over a sewing machine until my eyes burned and my fingers bled. $4,000 for straight teeth and a confident smile. Marcus showed promise in basketball. I worked holidays and double shifts to afford the club team fees, the camps, the travel tournaments. Watched him earn a partial scholarship to state school, and felt like every missed meal had been worth it. Daniel. Daniel needed the most. Tutoring for his learning disability. Therapy for his anxiety. Startup capital for his endless ideas. I gave and gave and gave, dipping into retirement funds I barely had, because that's what mothers do. That's what I'd been taught, what I'd believed to my core. Children are the greatest investment. Family is everything. Sacrifice is love, made visible. I had built my entire life on these principles, constructed my identity on the foundation of their success, their happiness, their futures. And now, at 72, lying in a rehabilitation facility with a new hip and a dwindling bank account, I was beginning to understand what I'd really built: a house of cards, a one-way relationship, a lifetime of transactions where I had given everything, and they had learned only how to take. Month 2 arrived with autumn leaves piling in the courtyard, and my bank account dropping to $8,305.36. Still no word from my sons. I'd stopped calling after the first month, stopped leaving voicemails that went unanswered, stopped sending texts that showed read, but generated no response. Pride, perhaps, or the dawning realization that desperation would only make me seem more pathetic, more easily ignored. I was walking now, slowly, with a cane, my gait unsteady but improving. The physical therapist praised my progress. I attended the facility's activity sessions, bingo on Tuesdays, music therapy on Thursdays, movie nights on Saturdays that featured films from decades past that most residents slept through. I made friends with Dorothy, a widow in the room next to mine who'd broken both ankles in a car accident. We played cards in the common room and shared stories, though I found myself editing mine, smoothing over the sharp edges of abandonment, with vague references to busy children and complicated schedules. Dorothy saw through it, I think. She had that look older women develop, the one that sees past polite lies to the truth beneath. But she didn't push, just patted my hand and dealt another round of gin rummy. In the evenings, I sat by my window and watched families visit other patients, watched daughters bring flowers and sons push wheelchairs around the courtyard, watched grandchildren color pictures and tape them to walls, watched the casual intimacy of people who showed up, who remembered, who cared. I wondered what I had done wrong. The question consumed me. Had I been too giving, teaching them that my resources were infinite, my love unconditional to the point of exploitation? Had I been too soft, never demanding reciprocity, never establishing that relationships require mutual effort? Or had I simply raised selfish men, despite my best efforts, despite the values I'd tried to instill, the examples I'd set, the countless conversations about gratitude and responsibility and love? The not knowing was almost worse than the abandonment itself. I started researching. The facility had a small computer room where residents could use the internet. I taught myself to navigate social media, creating accounts I'd never needed before, searching for my son's digital footprints. What I found was salt in wounds I'd been trying to ignore. Richard's LinkedIn showed him at a charity gala 2 weeks ago. Black tie event, wife in a designer gown, caption about giving back to the community. The hypocrisy was staggering. Marcus's Instagram was a parade of restaurant openings, wine tastings, weekend trips to Napa Valley. His latest post? A picture of an expensive watch, caption reading, treating myself, you only live once. That's why I'm blessed, living my best life. Daniel's Facebook was more sporadic, but there, posted just 5 days ago, was a photo of him at a Broncos game, luxury box seats, beer in hand, arm around a woman I didn't recognize. The caption, some people work for the weekend, I work for this. Winning. Luxury life. I sat in that computer room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt something inside me crack, not break. Breaking would have been too clean, too complete. This was a splintering, a fracturing along fault lines that had been developing for months, years, perhaps decades. My sons weren't too busy to contact me. They weren't overwhelmed with work or lost in crisis. They were living their lives, attending parties, taking vacations, buying luxury items. They had simply decided I wasn't worth their time. They had made a calculation, somewhere in those first weeks, that the promised care costs were inconvenient, that I was inconvenient, that the easiest path forward was silence and absence. They had gambled that I would handle it myself, that I would always handle it myself, just as I had handled everything for 50 years. And they'd been right. I had handled it, depleted my savings, paid the bills, asked nothing in return, and absorbed their abandonment with the same quiet endurance I'd shown through decades of single motherhood and financial struggle. I was enabling them even now, even in my rejection, by not demanding accountability, by not forcing confrontation, by protecting them from consequences. The realization settled over me like a heavy coat, uncomfortable, but clarifying. Something needed to change. I needed to change. I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer the day I was cleared to leave the facility for short trips. Gerald Hutchinson had handled my simple affairs for years. My will, the deed to my house, a small trust I'd established for my son's inheritance. He was 78, mostly retired, still maintaining a small practice from an office above a coffee shop in downtown Colorado Springs. His secretary, Agnes, a woman who'd probably been old when the office opened 40 years ago, led me slowly up the narrow stairs, waiting patiently as I navigated each step with my cane. Gerald stood when I entered, concern crossing his lined face. Eleanor, I heard about your fall. How are you managing? Managing, I said simply, settling into the leather chair across from his cluttered desk. The office smelled of old books and stale coffee, comforting in its permanence. That's actually why I'm here. He sat back down, folding his hands across a stomach that had expanded considerably since I'd first met him 20 years ago. The will? The will, I confirmed. He pulled a file from his cabinet, my name on the tab, surprisingly thick for someone whose life had been so simple. Your current will divide your estate equally among your 3 sons, the house, your savings, your life insurance policy, a few investment accounts. Total value, if we sold the house at current market rate, probably around $600,000. $600,000. A lifetime of careful saving, of denying myself luxuries, of maintaining a house I'd bought 30 years ago in a neighborhood that had gentrified around me. Money I'd protected and grown despite every reason to spend it, every emergency that had arisen, every time my sons had needed just a little help. I'd preserved it for them, for their futures, for the grandchildren I'd hoped to help with college funds, for the security I'd wanted them to have. In a way, I'd never had it. I want to change it, I said. Gerald's eyebrows rose slightly. Change how? I pulled a piece of paper from my purse, notes I'd made over the past week, careful calculations and research done in the computer room. In my room late at night, in the quiet moments between therapy sessions when my mind had finally cleared of excuses and sentiment. I want to divide my estate differently. I slid the paper across his desk. 50% to charity. I've selected 3 organizations, the Women's Shelter downtown, the Scholarship Fund at the community college, and the food bank I volunteered at for 15 years. Gerald nodded, making notes. The remaining 50% should be divided among my sons, but not equally. Richard gets 5%. Marcus gets 5%. Daniel gets 10%. He looked up sharply. That's quite a departure from equal distribution. May I ask why? Daniel, despite his flaws, at least showed up twice during my rehabilitation. Brief visits, awkward, but he came. He gets double for the minimum effort of presence. My voice was steady, clinical, a strange echo of Richard's tone in the hospital that day. Richard and Marcus made promises they had no intention of keeping. They abandoned me completely. They get a token amount so they cannot claim they were forgotten, only that they were weighed and found wanting. The remaining 30%? Gerald asked quietly. Established as a trust for future grandchildren's education, managed by an independent trustee. Not my sons. They get no access, no control. The money helps their children, if and when they exist, but never them. I paused, gathering my thoughts, my resolve, and I want to add a letter. A formal letter that will be read when the will is executed, explaining my decisions, documenting the promises made and broken, the 9 months of silence, the facility bills I paid alone from my savings, the photos of luxury boxes and expensive watches and charity galas while I sat alone in rehabilitation. Everything. Gerald was quiet for a long moment, studying me with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd watched human nature for nearly 8 decades. This will hurt them, Eleanor. Not financially, perhaps, given their apparent success, but emotionally, publicly. A will like this makes a statement. Good, I said simply. Let it hurt. Let them stand in a lawyer's office someday and hear the accounting of their choices. Let them explain to their wives, their friends, their children why their mother disinherited them. Let the truth be spoken, just once, clearly and without the excuses I've made for them my entire life. Are you certain? Sometimes people reconcile. Sometimes. It's been 9 months, Gerald. My voice cracked slightly. The first break in my composure. 9 months since they promised to help. 9 months of silence. I've called, texted, even sent letters. Nothing. They've made their choice. This is mine. He studied me for another moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll draft the new will and the letter. I'll need you to be very specific about dates, amounts, promises made, everything documented. I have it all. I pulled out a second folder I'd prepared, copies of the hospital conversation documented in my journal, the facility bills with my personal check numbers, screenshots of their social media posts, dated and printed, text messages sent and left unread, a timeline of calls made and not returned, 9 months of evidence, 9 months of proof that I had tried, had reached out, had given them every opportunity to honor their word. Gerald paged through it, his expression growing sadder with each sheet. When he finished, he looked at me with something that might have been admiration, or might have been pity. You've been thorough. I've had a lot of time to think, I replied. I signed the new will 3 weeks later. in the presence of Gerald and 2 witnesses pulled from the coffee shop downstairs. My signature felt heavier than usual, each letter a small act of severance, of claiming agency in a life that had been defined by service to others. The letter was harder. I wrote 17 drafts before settling on the final version, struggling to find the tone between justified anger and maudlin self-pity, between honest accounting and bitter recrimination. The final version was 2 pages, single-spaced, clinical in its precision. To my sons Richard, Marcus, and Daniel, if you are reading this, I have passed away, and we are meeting one final time in the reading of my will. I imagine this is not the meeting you anticipated. On October 12th, in St. Mary's Hospital, the 3 of you stood at my bedside and made me a promise. You would split my rehabilitation and care costs. You would be there for me. You would finally repay the decades of sacrifice I had poured into your lives. I believed you. Despite a lifetime of experience that might have taught me otherwise, I believed that my sons would honor their word. What followed were 9 months of silence, 9 months during which I paid $71,224 in rehabilitation and care costs from my personal savings, 9 months during which I called, texted, and wrote letters that went unanswered. 9 months during which I watched your social media posts documenting luxury purchases, expensive vacations, and charity galas while I sat alone in a rehabilitation facility, relearning how to walk. I've spent the past year examining my life, my choices, and my role in creating the dynamics that led to this abandonment. I accept responsibility for teaching you, through my endless giving and my failure to establish boundaries, that my resources and my love were unconditional to the point of exploitation. This will is my final lesson to you, though I suspect it comes too late. Your inheritance reflects your choices. The bulk of my estate goes to organizations that help people who cannot help themselves, who need support and receive it, who understand reciprocity and gratitude. You each receive a small amount, not because you've earned nothing, but because I want it clearly documented that you were not forgotten. You were weighed, you were measured, and you were found catastrophically wanting. I hope you build good lives. I hope you learn what I failed to teach you, that love is a verb, that family is a commitment, that promises matter. But I will not be here to help you anymore. I will not rescue you, fund you, or make excuses for you. I am finally free. Goodbye. Eleanor Morrison. I sealed it in an envelope, gave it to Gerald with instructions to file it with the will, and walked out of his office feeling lighter than I had in months. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Changing a will doesn't immediately change a life. I still returned to the rehabilitation facility, still attended physical therapy, still sat in the common room with Dorothy and played cards. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. I stopped checking my phone obsessively, hoping for messages that never came, stopped making excuses for my sons to the kind nurses who asked about family visits, stopped lying to myself about who they were and what our relationship had become. I started planning for a future that didn't revolve around them. The facility cleared me for discharge in month 4. My hip had healed well. My mobility was good. I could manage stairs, drive short distances, handle basic daily activities with minimal pain. I could go home. My house stood exactly as I'd left it, a small 2-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood of similar homes, most now occupied by young families who'd paid 3 times what I'd paid in 1985. The garden where I'd fallen was overgrown, tomatoes long since rotted on the vine, weeds claiming the careful beds I'd tended for decades. I stood in the doorway, keys in hand, and felt like a stranger in my own life. Every room held memories. Richard's height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the scuff on the hallway wall from Marcus's skateboard, the burn mark on the coffee table from one of Daniel's science experiments, the couch I'd worked overtime to afford, worn now but still sturdy, the dining table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together, ghosts everywhere. I spent the first week purging, not my son's childhood belongings. I wasn't that far gone in anger, but my own accumulated weight of expectation. I cleared out the guest room I'd maintained for visits that never happened. The extra kitchen supplies I'd kept for dinners I never hosted, the family photo albums I'd meticulously maintained while they lived their lives unburdened by the past. I donated boxes to Goodwill, simplified, streamlined, created space for something new, though I wasn't yet sure what that something was. My neighbor Carol, a woman 10 years younger who'd moved in 3 years ago with her husband and 2 kids, knocked on my door the second week I was home. "Eleanor, we've been so worried. We saw the ambulance that day, and then you were just gone." "Rehabilitation facility," I explained, accepting the casserole dish she thrust into my hands. "I'm better now. Your sons never came by. I thought maybe they'd been checking on the house, but..." She trailed off delicately. "They've been busy," I said, the lie automatic, then stopped myself. "Actually, no, they haven't visited. They made promises they didn't keep, and were not in contact anymore." Carol's eyes widened slightly at the blunt honesty, but then she nodded. "My brother's like that. Some people are just takers. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. Not anymore." And saying it out loud, I realized it was becoming true. "Would you like coffee?" We sat in my kitchen, 2 women who'd waved to each other for 3 years, but never really talked, and had the first honest conversation I'd had in months. Carol told me about her difficult relationship with her own parents, about setting boundaries, about learning to protect herself while still being kind. I told her about the will, about the decision, about the strange freedom of releasing expectations. "Good for you," she said firmly. "My therapist says you can't control other people's choices, only your own responses. Sounds like you responded." After she left, I sat in my quiet house and let her words settle. Control, response, choice. I'd spent 72 years trying to control outcomes through sacrifice, believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, supported enough, my sons would become the men I'd hoped they'd be. But they'd made their own choices, and I couldn't control that. I could only control my response. The will was my response, but it couldn't be the only one. I got a part-time job at the library. The decision surprised even me. I was 72, recently recovered from major surgery, with enough savings remaining, just barely, to live modestly without income. I didn't need to work, but I wanted to. The library hired me for 15 hours a week, shelving books and helping patrons navigate the computer system. The pay was minimum wage. The work was simple, sometimes monotonous, often requiring me to stretch and bend in ways that made my new hip complain. I loved every minute of it. There was something deeply satisfying about the order of it. The Dewey Decimal System's promise that everything had a place, that chaos could be organized, that disorder was temporary and fixable. I helped teenagers find resources for school projects, taught seniors how to download ebooks, recommended novels to lonely people who seemed to need the escape. I made friends with my coworkers, a mix of ages and backgrounds, people who worked for passion rather than necessity, who cared about literacy and access and the quiet revolutionary act of free public resources. They invited me to lunch, to book clubs, to trivia nights at the pub downtown. I said yes. For the first time in my adult life, I built a social circle that wasn't defined by motherhood, by my son's needs, by family obligation. I was just Eleanor, a woman who liked mystery novels and strong coffee, who had opinions about local politics, who laughed at stupid jokes and stayed up too late talking about philosophy with people half her age. I joined a water aerobics class at the community center, started attending a weekly meditation group at the Unitarian Church, volunteered at the food bank on Saturday mornings, the same food bank that would receive a substantial portion of my estate someday. I built a life, a small life perhaps, measured against the grand narratives of success and achievement, but mine, chosen, intentional. And still, my phone remained silent. 9 months became 10. 10 became 11. I stopped counting. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in July, 14 months after the hospital. I was in the garden, finally having restored it to something resembling order, when my phone rang. Unknown number, Colorado area code. I almost didn't answer, expecting a robocall or scammer. "Hello, Mrs. Morrison?" This is Jennifer Caldwell from Colorado Springs Regional Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Daniel Morrison. He was brought in this morning after a car accident. He's stable, but he's listed you as his emergency contact." The world tilted slightly. I sat down hard on the garden bench, dirt-covered gloves still on my hands. "How bad?" I asked. "Broken arm, concussion, some lacerations. He'll be fine. But he needs to stay overnight for observation. He's asking for you." Of course he was. I sat in that garden for 10 minutes after hanging up, watching bees work my lavender, listening to Carol's children playing in their yard next door, feeling the warmth of July sun on my face. Then I stood, went inside, and drove to the hospital. Daniel was in a room on the 4th floor, his right arm in a cast, a bandage across his forehead, looking young and scared, and somehow exactly like the boy who'd fallen off his bike at 9 and cried for me. "Mom," he breathed when he saw me. "You came." "Of course I came. You were in an accident. I wasn't sure you would. After everything?" I pulled a chair beside his bed and sat down carefully, my hips still protesting extended standing. "Tell me what happened," he explained. Distracted driving, another car running a light, his truck rolling twice before coming to rest in a ditch. Lucky to be alive. Terrifying. Sobering. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said when he finished, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. For not being there, for not calling, for not helping with the bills like I promised. I don't know why I didn't. It seemed hard, and I was busy, and then time passed and it felt too late to reach out and— Stop." My voice was firm but not unkind. "I don't need excuses. I don't need justifications. I know why you didn't call. You didn't call because it was easier not to, because I've spent your entire life making things easy for you, and you've learned to take the easy path." He flinched, as if I'd struck him. "I love you, Daniel. I have loved you since the moment you were born, but I have enabled you, supported you without requiring accountability, given without establishing reciprocity, and that has harmed you more than it's helped you." "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I want to change. I want to be better. What you want doesn't matter right now," I interrupted gently. "What matters is what you do. Words are easy. Promises are cheap. I've heard them both from you and your brothers more times than I can count." I stood, my hip protesting, my heart heavy, but clear. "I'll make sure you get home safely when they discharge you tomorrow. I'll check on you once to make sure you're settling in. But after that, Daniel, you need to figure out your life without me as your safety net. I can't do this anymore. I won't do this anymore." "But Mom, I've changed my will," I said quietly. "You get 10% of my estate. Your brothers get 5% each. The rest goes to charity." His face went white. "What?" "You're getting exactly what you've earned. A small acknowledgement for the minimal effort you've shown. The will includes a letter explaining why, documenting the promises, the silence, the abandonment. When I'm gone, you'll stand in a lawyer's office and hear it all read aloud. You can't— it's your money. You can do what you want, but— Yes," I agreed. "It's my money, my choices, my life, and I'm choosing to invest it in organizations that actually help people, that show up consistently, that understand reciprocity." I moved toward the door, then paused. "I hope you recover quickly. I hope you learn from this accident, both the car crash and the crash of our relationship. I hope you build a better life, but I won't be funding it anymore. I won't be saving you anymore. I'm done." I walked out of that hospital room and didn't look back. Daniel called 3 times the next week. I didn't answer. Richard called 2 days after Daniel's accident. Apparently his brothers still communicated with each other, just not with me. I let it go to voicemail. "Mom, I heard about Daniel, and I heard about what you said about the will. Can we please talk? I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never meant to abandon you. We just got caught up in our lives and— Delete," Marcus texted. "Mom, we need to talk about this will situation. This isn't fair. We've always been there for you. I blocked his number. I had spent 72 years being available, being understanding, being the one who accommodated and adjusted and made things work. I had listened to explanations and excuses and promises until they became a meaningless loop of sound without substance. I was done listening. My life contracted and expanded simultaneously. Smaller in terms of family connections, larger in terms of personal freedom. I traveled for the first time in decades. A bus tour through the Southwest with a group from the senior center, marveling at canyons and desert stars. I took a watercolor class and discovered I had a modest talent for landscapes. I read 100 books in 6 months, novels I'd been too busy to enjoy when I was working 3 jobs and raising 3 sons. I lived, not for them, not in preparation for grandchildren who might never exist. Not in service to a family identity that had been one-sided all along. For me, 15 months after the hospital, I received a certified letter. Richard, Marcus, and Daniel had hired a lawyer. They were contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity, claiming I'd been manipulated or wasn't of sound mind when I'd made the changes. I sat in my kitchen, reading the legal language, and started laughing. The irony was exquisite. They'd ignored me for over a year, but the moment their inheritance was threatened, suddenly they had time. Suddenly I mattered. Suddenly they were united, communicating, taking action. Not because they loved me, not because they wanted a relationship, because they wanted money. I called Gerald immediately. "Can they do this?" I asked. "They can try," he said calmly. "But you documented everything extensively. You were examined by doctors regularly during your rehabilitation. All confirmed you were cognitively sound. You weren't coerced or manipulated. You made a clear, rational decision based on their documented behavior. Any judge will see that. How long will this take? Could be 6 months to a year if they push it. Expensive for them. Their lawyer fees alone will probably exceed what they'd gain by winning. But people don't always make rational decisions when it comes to inheritances." "Let them try," I said firmly. "I have documentation. I have witnesses. I have truth on my side. Let them spend their money fighting this. Let them reveal their characters publicly. I'm not changing anything." The lawsuit moved forward slowly. A background hum of legal nonsense that my lawyer handled while I continued living my life. I refused to engage directly with my sons, communicating only through Gerald, maintaining boundaries that felt like freedom rather than punishment. They demanded a meeting. I declined. They sent flowers with notes of apology. I donated them to the nursing home. They showed up at my house once, all 3 together, Richard's expensive car parked in my driveway like an accusation. I watched them through the window, 3 middle-aged men in business casual, looking uncomfortable and determined, and I simply didn't answer the door. They knocked for 10 minutes, rang the doorbell, called my phone, texted. I sat in my living room reading a mystery novel and let them stand there. Eventually they left. Carol, who'd witnessed the whole thing from her window, came over an hour later with wine. "That took guts," she said, pouring us each a glass. "That took boundaries," I corrected, something I should have established 40 years ago. We toasted to boundaries, to choices, to the radical act of prioritizing our own well-being. The judge dismissed their lawsuit 8 months later. The ruling was brief and devastating. The plaintiff's sons have failed to demonstrate any evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. The defendant mother has provided extensive documentation of her sound mental state, clear intentions and rational motivations for her testamentary choices. Furthermore, the court notes that the plaintiff's 14-month absence following their documented promises of support, combined with their immediate legal action upon learning of their reduced inheritance, speaks to the very character concerns the defendant cited in her will explanation. Case dismissed with prejudice. Plaintiffs responsible for all legal fees. Gerald called to read me the ruling, barely containing his satisfaction. "How much did they spend fighting this?" I asked. "Combined? Probably close to $60,000 in legal fees." I did the math quickly. Richard and Marcus were each set to inherit 5% of a $600,000 estate, $30,000 each. Daniel would get 10%, $60,000. They'd spent more fighting for the money than they would gain by winning. Poetic justice, Gerald observed. Expensive justice, I agreed. But I hope they learned something. Do you really? I considered the question honestly. No, probably not. But I had to hope, didn't I? Otherwise, what was the point of any of it? 2 years after the hospital, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The irony of surviving a hip replacement only to face cancer wasn't lost on me. I sat in the oncologist's office, a different hospital this time, newer, brighter, somehow more clinical in its efficiency, and listened to treatment options, survival rates, timelines, aggressive chemotherapy, possible radiation, surgery. A year of my life dedicated to fighting for more years. Who will be supporting you through this? The oncologist, a kind woman in her 40s named Dr. Patel, asked gently. Myself, I said simply. Family? Friends? I have friends, a good support system. But no family involvement. She made notes, her expression carefully neutral. Treatment can be very difficult to manage alone. Transportation to appointments, help during recovery periods, emotional support. I understand. I'll manage. And I did. Carol drove me to chemotherapy appointments, sitting with me during the long infusions, bringing magazines and snacks and her steady, undemanding presence. My library co-workers organized a meal train, delivering dinners on my worst days. Dorothy, my friend from the rehabilitation facility, called weekly to check in, her dark humor about our falling apart bodies, somehow comforting. My meditation group sent cards. My book club adjusted meeting times to accommodate my energy levels. My water aerobics instructor modified exercises for days when I felt strong enough to attend. I had built a community, not through blood or obligation, but through genuine connection, mutual support, reciprocal care. My sons. Silence. I didn't inform them of the diagnosis, didn't reach out. If they'd maintained any connection, even minimal, distant, uncomfortable, they might have known. But they'd severed the relationship as completely as I had, apparently content to exist in the limbo of estrangement, until my death triggered the inheritance they'd fought for. I lost my hair, lost weight, lost the easy assumption that I'd see 80, let alone 90. But I gained clarity. Every difficult chemotherapy session, every night spent sick and shaking, every moment of fear about mortality crystallized my understanding. I had made the right choice. If I'd maintained the old relationship, I'd be going through this while still making excuses for them, still hoping they'd show up, still being disappointed by their absence. I'd be experiencing both cancer and the pain of unmet expectations. Instead, I experienced only cancer, and I faced it with people who'd chosen to be in my life, who showed up consistently, who demonstrated through action, not words, what care actually looked like. I survived, not easily, not without scars, physical and emotional, but I reached remission after 14 months of treatment, my hair growing back silver white and curly, my body thinner but resilient, my spirit battered but somehow stronger. My oncologist called it remarkable. My friends called it a miracle. I called it stubbornness. I'd survived an abusive marriage, survived single motherhood in poverty, survived a broken hip and abandonment and the death of my illusions about family. I could survive cancer. And I did. On my 75th birthday, I threw myself a party. Not a big affair. Just the people who'd been there, who'd shown up, who'd proven through 3 years of consistency that they valued my presence in their lives. We gathered in my backyard, the garden restored and thriving, fairy lights strung through the trees, a potluck spread across tables Carol and her husband had helped me set up that morning. My library co-workers brought books as gifts, first editions, signed copies, treasures they'd found knowing my tastes. Dorothy brought chocolate cake, Carol brought flowers. My meditation group brought a beautiful journal for the next chapter. We ate and talked and laughed as the summer sun set over Colorado Springs, as the mountains turned pink and gold, as the air cooled and the lights twinkled on. Someone asked about my birthday wish. I looked around at these people, these friends who'd chosen me as I'd chosen them, who demonstrated that family is built not through biology, but through consistent reciprocal care, and realized I didn't have a wish. I had everything I needed. I wish for more of this, I said finally. More moments exactly like this one. More ordinary magic with people I love. We toasted to that, to ordinary magic, to chosen family, to the audacious act of building joy after grief. Later, after everyone had left, and I was cleaning up in the quiet twilight, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen, his name glowing in the darkness, and felt nothing. Not anger, not hope. Just a mild curiosity about what crisis had prompted contact after 3 years of silence. I didn't answer. Whatever he wanted, whatever he needed, whatever explanation or excuse or request he had prepared, it didn't matter anymore. I had built a life that didn't include him, didn't include any of them, and it was a good life, a full life, a life I'd chosen deliberately, piece by piece, relationship by relationship, boundary by boundary. The voicemail notification appeared. I deleted it without listening. Then I finished cleaning up, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in my garden under the fairy lights, feeling the cool night air and the satisfaction of choices made and boundaries held. 6 months later, Marcus's wife, a woman I'd met twice, briefly, at their wedding 15 years ago, and at one strained Christmas dinner, showed up at my door. "Eleanor," she said, her voice shaking, "can we talk?" I almost said no, almost closed the door, but something in her expression, fear, desperation, made me pause. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside. We sat in my living room, the space I'd reclaimed and redecorated, purged of old family photos and filled instead with art from my watercolor class and books from my library work. "Marcus doesn't know I'm here," she began. "He'd be furious if he knew, but I need you to know something." I waited. The restaurant business is failing. All 3 locations. He's been hiding it from everyone, keeping up appearances, but we're drowning in debt. Over $1 million. Our house is being foreclosed on. We're filing bankruptcy next month. She twisted her hands together, not meeting my eyes. "He's been hoping you'd die soon. I'm sorry, that's horrible to say, but it's true. He's been counting on the inheritance to save us, even the 5%. At this point, $30,000 would help, and he's convinced himself that you'll change your mind before you die, that he can somehow fix this with you." "He can't," I said simply. I know that now, but he doesn't, or he won't accept it." She finally looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I'm leaving him. I'm taking our daughter and moving back to my parents' house. I can't do this anymore. The lying, the debt, the fantasy that somehow money will just appear and solve everything." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Not sorry enough to change anything, but genuinely sad that another person was caught in the consequences of my son's choices. "Don't be. You were right to cut them off. I've watched Marcus for 15 years make excuses, blame others, avoid responsibility. I thought it was immaturity he'd outgrow, but it's who he is, who they all are, maybe." She stood to leave, then paused. "Richard's firm is investigating him for billing irregularities. Daniel's current startup is being sued for fraud. Your sons are not doing well, Eleanor. And I think maybe they never learned how to do well, because someone was always there to catch them." After she left, I sat in the silence and absorbed this information. My sons were failing, publicly, spectacularly, in ways that would humiliate them and destroy the facades they'd carefully constructed. I felt nothing, no satisfaction. No vindication, no secret pleasure at their downfall, but also no guilt, no urge to rescue, no maternal instinct to save them from consequences they'd earned. They were adults. They'd made choices. They were facing results. That was life. I updated my will one final time. Not the percentages, those stayed the same, but I added a final paragraph to the letter A postscript written 3 years after the first version. P.S. 3 years have passed since I wrote the original version of this letter. In that time, you have made no genuine effort to repair our relationship. You have contacted me only when you wanted something. When Daniel was in an accident and needed help. When you wanted to contest the will and needed me to capitulate. When your various crises have made my small inheritance seem valuable. I have lived 3 good years without you. I have built a community, pursued interests, survived cancer, created a life of purpose and joy. I have not needed you, and that freedom has been transformative. I hope you find what you're looking for, though I suspect what you're looking for is someone to blame for your failures and someone to fund your futures. I am neither. I am simply a woman who gave everything she had to 3 sons and received nothing in return, and who finally learned that the most radical act of self-love is refusing to participate in your own diminishment. Live well, or don't, but live with the understanding that your choices have consequences, and I am one of them. Eleanor, I sealed it, filed it, and felt the final weight lift. I'm 78 now, 3 years into remission, still working part-time at the library, still tending my garden, still attending meditation and book club and water aerobics. My sons exist somewhere in the world, living lives I know nothing about, facing futures that don't include me. I've heard rumors. Richard lost his partnership. Marcus's bankruptcy made the local news. Daniel moved out of state, fleeing debts and burned bridges. I feel neither responsible nor vindicated by these outcomes. They are simply the natural results of decades of choices, of patterns established and never broken, of character revealed under pressure. My life is small and full. I have friends who check on me daily, a community that values my presence, purpose in my volunteer work, joy in simple things, morning coffee, good books, garden tomatoes, sunset views of the mountains. I will die someday. Probably sooner than I'd like, but later than I feared during cancer treatment. When I do, my sons will receive their letters and their small inheritances. They will stand in Gerald's office. He's still practicing at 81, stubborn as ever, and hear the accounting of their choices. Maybe it will change them. Probably it won't. But it will stand as testimony, as proof that I saw clearly, chose deliberately, and refused to let their rejection define my worth. The bulk of my estate will go to organizations that help people who need it, who appreciate it, who understand that generosity is a gift, not an entitlement. My house will be sold, probably to a young family who'll paint over my color choices and tear out my garden and make it their own. My books will go to the library I've served, my art supplies to the community center, my small treasures to the friends who've treasured me. I will leave the world lighter than I entered it, having learned too late but not too late that love given without boundaries is not love at all, but a slow form of self-destruction. I will leave knowing I broke the cycle, even if I couldn't fix the damage. I will leave free, and that, after 78 years, is enough. If you've lived through family betrayal, financial abuse, or the quiet devastation of being taken for granted, you're not alone. Your pain is valid, your anger is justified, and your choice to set boundaries, to demand reciprocity, to refuse to participate in your own diminishment, that choice is powerful and right. Share this story if you know someone who needs permission to choose themselves. Comment with your own story of empowerment. And subscribe for more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage to rewrite the narratives of their lives. Remember, it's never too late to change the ending. Thank you for listening to my story, and thank you for being here.